Good evening and welcome to the Dallas Architecture Forum's lecture with the distinguished architect Jason Long of OMA, New York. My name is Nate Daly, the Executive Director of the Forum, and we are grateful that you have joined us virtually for tonight's program. We think it'll be a very special evening. The Dallas Architecture Forum educates, enriches, and connects our community by presenting programs and events, creating experiences, and engaging both global and local thought leaders from the design fields to enhance how we live. We want to give special recognition to the outstanding sponsors who've made this evening possible. The Forum is grateful to our lecture season sponsors, Basil Halloum Group, Briggs Freeman Sotheby's International Realty, Reggie Graham, Maharga Development, Perennials in Sutherland, and Smink for their leadership support. We're thankful for our series sponsors, Bodron Fruit, DLR Group Stoffelbach, HKS, Jackson Walker, Kafka Properties, Modern Dallas, O'Brien Architects, Scott and Cooner, and Scott and Reed General Contractors for their support as series sponsors. We're thankful for our lecture sponsors for this evening, Billingsley Company, Callison RTKL, HDR, Rogers O'Brien Construction, and Turner Construction. And our reception sponsors for this evening are Micon, Panoramic Doors, and TKO Associates. The Forum is also pleased to thank UTA Kappa and Brad Bell, the Director of the School of Architecture at Kappa, and also the Forum's Lecture Programming Chair, for his active involvement in planning for this program. We also appreciate the collaboration of the Aga Khan Council for the Central United States for this evening. On behalf of the Forum, we thank all of these valued sponsors and collaborators who made this evening possible. Thank you very much. And now I'm pleased to call on Ron Stomarski, a member of the Forum's Board of Directors and Design Director at Perkins & Will, to introduce Jason Long. Following Jason's presentation, Ron will have a brief dialogue with Jason, and then we will have time for your viewers' questions via the Zoom Q&A function. Thank you again for joining us, and welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Nate, and good evening, everyone, and welcome, Jason. Jason Long is a partner at OMA based out of the New York office, and I personally contend that it would be difficult to find a design studio that has contributed more to the creative and intellectual dimensions of the practice of architecture. Since joining the firm in 2003, Jason has brought a research-driven, interdisciplinary approach to a wide range of OMA's projects internationally. From concept to completion, he served as the project manager for a new national museum in Quebec City and the Faena Forum, a multi-purpose venue in Miami. Currently, he is leading 3 projects focusing on urbanism and the public realm in Washington, D.C. that provide an innovative approach to recreation, public health, and equitable development at varying scales. These include the 11th Street Bridge Park, a new elevated green space crossing the Anacostia River, a sport and recreation master plan for the RFK Stadium Armory campus, and a streetscape design for Washington, D.C.'s Convention Center. In addition, he is designing a multi-level restaurant within the new First and Broadway Park in downtown Los Angeles. His portfolio extends to residential development in California and New York, including the Avery in San Francisco, and most recently 2 new towers for Greenpoint Landing, OMA's first project in Brooklyn. He has recently focused on a number of adaptive reuse projects, including one which we might consider local, the transformation of a post office warehouse in downtown Houston into a mixed-use hub. Also, an historic parking garage in New York City into a new synagogue, and a laboratory building at the University of Toronto into a center for the university administration. Jason also previously served as a key member of AMO and was associate editor of content, published by Taschen in 2004, which I might suggest has one of the more memorable book covers of the recent past, so be sure to check it out if you haven't seen that already. Currently, he is working with the City of Jersey City on strategic planning for a new cultural institution within the historic Pathside building in Journal Square. Jason holds a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Vassar College and a Master of Architecture from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, and currently teaches at the Cornell University School of Architecture, Art, and Planning. As you can hear, Jason brings a wide range of geographic and typological experience, all with a strategic eye towards city building and purposeful connectedness. With that, I would like to thank Jason once again for participating in the Forum's lecture series for what I expect will be an invigorating presentation. Please help me virtually welcome Jason Long.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me and see me. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me to talk for a little bit about some of the work that we're doing. I will share my screen. I wanted to start with a kind of little bit of a broader discussion or look at the time that we're in right now. It's true, of course, specifically of this moment, but I would say it's been true for some time that we live in a particularly divisive time. And I've been trying to think a little bit about what that means for us working in such a moment and how it relates to some projects that we've been doing intentionally or otherwise. Of course, it's a time where political divisions are more present than ever, where there's a kind of increasing lack of overlap, you could say, between different parties, and a moment where our opinions about things are maybe only converging around a certain kind of skepticism towards authority or the public realm or the ability for government to work properly. Maybe you see some of that skepticism towards authority in waves of protests that happened, for example, in Hong Kong, which is where this image is from, or more recently here in the US. Of course, you also see division working its way into the economy, something that's, of course, only been accelerated by the recent downturn, and also internationally. And so, as I mentioned, I'm interested in thinking about what is architecture for a divisive moment. Architecture is, of course, inherently engaged with dichotomies, with clarity between open and closed, or inside and outside, or old and new, solid and void. But as long as I've been studying or practicing architecture, these dichotomies were always something to be challenged or blurred or overcome. And I wonder, looking at the moment that we're in now, what we can learn maybe from division and maybe coming face to face with division. Of course, being divided is something that's been present for all of us over the last 6 months more than ever due to COVID-19 and what we've all had to do to try to deal with it. I used to show this photo, which is of a park space where everyone is just looking at their phone. So a public space where being together in public really just means being absorbed into your own digital universe. Now this almost seems kind of nostalgic in the wake of what we've been dealing with lately. And a moment when kind of the notion of the collective is something you mainly hear about in terms of the potential for herd immunity. But I wonder if maybe out of this moment, there might come a kind of deeper understanding or a deeper or a new way of thinking about being together once we really can. So a different kind of community. Thinking about how things that are divided can be reconnected is something we dealt with actually in Dallas a number of years ago when we took part in the Dallas Connected City kind of challenge or kind of design competition. Where we thought about how to reconnect Dallas with the Trinity River. Of course, Dallas is disconnected from the river both by history and topography and also by infrastructure. And the challenge of connecting it is something that's will involve kind of tremendous process, which obviously is ongoing now with all the improvements that have taken place to create new links, but also to revitalize the channel itself. In our case, we were proposing to try to institute a number of measures to try to bring the river closer to the city and conversely the city closer to the river, starting with the idea of trying to daylight portions of the old Trinity River, currently more of a underground drainage channel, as a way of making along the line of downtown Dallas kind of a new amenity that would help anchor a series of new developments. This design challenge was really thinking so far into the future that it's hard to even understand, but we're excited to see things start to come together. We also imagined ways in which you could create new gateways to the river itself from downtown. So here actually looking over Dealey Plaza to what was a kind of potential iconic gateway building. At Dealey Plaza specifically, we had proposed an intervention to create a new backdrop for the plaza, a kind of cover for the highway that would simultaneously frame the plaza in a new way and shield it from the noise and the pollution of the cars, but also create a kind of new link over it, connecting the JFK Memorial Plaza with Dealey Plaza itself. We also thought that potentially the main street, which cuts through the middle of this kind of large median, could be pedestrianized and kind of reframe the space as a public space that people would come to and gather in. Connecting to or over rivers is also something we're engaged in right now at the 11th Street Bridge Park in Washington, D.C. This is a project that seeks to connect two very different sides of the Anacostia River, the kind of east side of DC. You can see that the east side of the Anacostia River, which is to the left side of this image, was something that was always a bit forgotten, not included in L'Enfant's original plan for DC. It's also, the Anacostia creates a dividing line between the west side of the river, the part of the city that most people go to, and the east side of the river. One side is more formal with all the icons we know of the nation's capital. The other more informal. One is there's a great deal of economic disparity that cuts across the line of the river, and also racial disparity. And maybe because DC is such an itinerant place in part, but also because there's been a huge influx of people into DC over the last decade. It also divides kind of native DCians from others. It also divides what's kind of seen as the tourist areas from, as shown in this kind of map made by others, the zone of perceived danger. It's also a place where there are a lot of pedestrian casualties in comparison to the rest of the city, and that's something that, of course, we're directly engaged with because we're creating a new pedestrian link actually across the river. So the history of the project is that there were two bridges created across the Anacostia at this location. The original 11th Street Bridge is here on the south side, and then those bridges were replaced, but their piers remained, and the vision is to reuse those existing foundations and piers as a foundation for a new pedestrian link and park over the river. When we came to design the bridge, we wanted to create a symbol of connection, but that would also reflect each side of the river. So we extended a platform from the west and a platform from the east, and had them merge together over a plaza space that would be a collecting point for both sides. Created a kind of layered form for the bridge that we hope will be an iconic public place in DC, but it also has a number of benefits that will make the bridge kind of come alive. And here you see it from the west. So these crossing of platforms elevates either end, creating kind of vantage points out to the rest of DC, looking back to the Capitol and also looking to the east to Anacostia. So here, kind of viewpoint out to the Capitol and the Washington Monument, and also looking down the river itself. And then here, looking back to Anacostia. It's also a shape that helps us deal with one of the main problems, and something, of course, everybody in Texas is familiar with, the issue of heat in public spaces in the summertime. DC is a kind of former swamp, as you probably know, and creating shade was critical. And between the form of the bridge itself and plantings that will be on the bridge, we have a continuous shaded path that will extend across it. The form also gives us the depth to create a kind of a very efficient structural system for the bridge, kind of cantilevered bridge system that not only gives us the structural depth to do the spans, but also avoid the false work in the river. You can see that here, and it also serves as a backdrop for everything that's happening on the bridge, including places like hammock groves, where the hammocks are almost an extension of the structure itself. We wanted the bridge to be a really richly programmed space with a series of different activities, not just a bridge for crossing, but really a place to be. Like the Rialto Bridge in Venice, it should be a place where people come together to cross, but also to do different things. It's almost like the Rialto, but with a twist. And those programs really offset other moments that are more park-like or merely planted, places for recreation or relaxation as you approach the bridge here from the west. But they're complemented by programs like an amphitheater space that looks down onto the river, a main plaza that will be the home for food markets and other gatherings, a cafe with a shaded terrace where people can gather together, and on the east side of the river, also an environmental education center that extends down to the level of the river itself and will be a place where children will come to learn about the river in this location, but also go out onto the river via a kayak launch that is adjacent to it. So we're moving into the next phase with this, and hopefully we'll start construction in about a year or so. We hope the bridge and the shape and everything that happens here will make it really a different kind of icon for DC. One that almost springs from L'Enfant's plan, where each of these crossing points are the main civic moments of the city, but one that maybe stands in contrast to the clarity and uniformity of the icons we know from the city, but one that will still kind of hold its own. Next, I wanted to talk about a kind of very different project in Houston that was mentioned earlier, post-Houston. Houston is a place that I know well. My family is partly in Houston, and I spent a lot of my childhood there. It's a city that's really rife with dichotomies between a megalopolis of architecture, but also kind of megalopolis of oil. It's a place where the lack of zoning makes for inadvertent juxtapositions. And one of those juxtapositions is actually our site. So here, the former Barbara Jordan post office and warehouse, just on the edge of DC, just on the edge of downtown Houston, across the Buffalo Bayou. This is an enormous building, almost 1,000 feet long, that looks out, at least from its rooftop, onto the kind of best skyline view of Houston. A juxtaposition between high-rise and low-rise, and between concrete from both the highways, but our building itself, and the green space of the bayou, which, as I'm sure you know, has been transformed into a real public amenity for the city. It's a building that, as I mentioned, is almost 1,000 feet long, so you could fit in 4 747s, and whose economy, in a way, is created a kind of real starkness to the building that's quite strong. It's an industrial building. A lot of really all the mail for the whole region here came through this post office warehouse and sorting facility, where people inside really took care of the mail. And here you see that recently, kind of before we started construction, a sea of columns and lights and even spy tunnels that were used. And you can see that here to surveil the post office workers to make sure they weren't stealing the mail. So our plan for the building is really to try to almost farm it, to extend a series of atriums into it to help get our heads around it so it can be programmed in a way that is coherent, but also to draw the city into the building, through it, and even up onto a rooftop park that will sit atop it. So within the building, there's a series of atriums that also define different zones, kind of retail, theater, promenade, a market hall, co-working and collaboration space, and then later on the east side, a new music venue. So in each case, we wanted to create a void that would bring light into the building, but also a stair that would connect the two levels of the building and also the roof together. So in these three atriums, there are a series of very distinct stairs, each with their own materiality and structure and way of engaging with the building. they create an identity, but also a kind of interesting way to get up. Here you see a model of the first floor with each of these stairs and the programs around them. And then here the second level that will be offices, and then the rooftop that extends up. So as we cut into the building as construction began, it was amazing to see kind of light come into these spaces suddenly. Here again, you see this so-called spy tunnels on the right. And to see the city revealed in a new way from within them. Looking down kind of into these atriums, you could see a kind of juxtaposition suddenly between the past and the future. In each case, the atriums are covered with a series of ETFE panels. Each rooftop is somewhat distinctive in the way that you get onto the roof, but each has these ETFE panels. ETFE is, of course, a kind of membrane structure that's lightweight, which was critical for us given the limitations of the existing building, but also economical, and creates a light condition on the interior that's akin to being outside. So they have a kind of incredible indoor-outdoor quality, or at least that's our hope. So here you see the ETFE inflated above one of these stairs. Each of the stairs we wanted to be almost a social condenser, so a place where people would come together and meet spontaneously. So we designed each of them in a way that could make for overlapping paths or places to be. So the first zigzags, there's a zigzagging stair that's mirrored to create two X's moving up as you go up from one floor to the next. So here you see it, and that's supported on a box beam that's interwoven into the structure that's already there. So essentially a beam spans between these two columns that define a concourse running the other direction, and a huge box beam comes down to support the precast treads of the stair. Here that's, see that installed in the space. And then here more recently with the precast treads already installed. Each of these precast treads is supported off of the box beam via a kind of simple system of embedded plates in the precast that then are welded to similar angles on the box beam itself, so that as each one is placed, it can be adjusted and leveled. Here you see that in progress with each of these kind of tabs that sit on or welded to the box beam to accept the tabs that are embedded into each precast tread. Here in progress, and then here in place. I think the form of this is simple in some ways, but at the same time, as you move around it, has a kind of different appearance from above or underneath. In the next atrium over, will be a market hall and a series of food kiosks, and we wanted to create a stair that could be dynamic, but take up much less space, given that we wanted to fill the atrium itself with these retail kiosks. And so it's two stairs that are actually double helix together, so wound around one another, and then clad in aluminum, so that they're actually two stairs, and if one person goes up one side and another the other, you can constantly see one another. The stair itself is supported off of kind of essentially a column here in the middle, a series of aluminum sections that will be assembled on site, and you can already see this kind of column that will support the whole thing in the space. Because there are two different stairs that are wound around one another, here you actually you can exit to either side of the atrium. And the next atrium is the co-working atrium. Co-working maybe seems like something hard to imagine at the moment, but our desire to work in spaces a little bit separated out from each other is maybe more potent than ever. And so here we wanted to make a stair that almost like a piece of origami would unfold, creating not just a way up, but also a series of large platforms where you could work or meet. And in this case, it's hung from the structure above. One of the challenges in doing this project was actually looking at dealing with the kind of historic tax credits and the limitations that they create, and what we could do, especially on the exterior of the building. We needed to kind of celebrate its basic qualities, and in our case, its basic quality is primarily that it's a blank box. But we found ways to work within the openings that were already within the facade, a series of vent grills, to further create a series of punches, almost like a Fontana painting that could extend the language that was there and still allow additional daylight into offices on the second level. So almost like a kind of punch card, computer punch card. And then that, together with a series of skylights, will let light also in throughout the second level of the building. So here you see those punches coming into place. And then here, the kind of cutting of the skylights and the solids that remained. So we'll be wrapping up construction kind of early next year, and are excited to bring this to Texas. And last, I just wanted to quickly show a project that we're doing here in Brooklyn, a residential tower, or a series of 2 towers in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Greenpoint is on the northern end of Brooklyn, across the East River from Manhattan. It's really part of a wave of development that's happening along the entire waterfront of Brooklyn, and also Queens and Long Island City. It's really started in Long Island City, extended down into Williamsburg, and then where it's continued. Williamsburg is a little bit different from those other neighborhoods in that it has a very predominantly kind of low-rise feeling that extends to a kind of industrial waterfront at the East River's edge. So it's a kind of juxtaposition in the overall city between low-rise and high-rise. High-rise bringing what we're inevitably bringing here in these new residential towers, but also between the industrial waterfront and the low-rise neighborhood that most people think of as Greenpoint. And here we're working within a larger master plan called Greenpoint Landing. So faced with the issue of how to bring 2 new towers, one 300 feet and one 400 feet to this neighborhood, and trying to do it in a way that would integrate to a certain degree with the neighborhood that existed, I can't say we didn't struggle. We kind of went through many different options and strategies. But in the end, the one that we felt worked was one that tried to directly address a difficulty inherent in the kind of zoning that had been put in place. Essentially, given the dimensions of the site and the requirements for setbacks, if we utilize the maximum potential floor plates for these 2 towers, we would end up with them only 40 feet apart, which we thought really wasn't workable. If we spread them back out to be 60 feet apart, we ended up with footprints that were maybe too small overall. But so we extended each tower strategically so that they could hit that maximum footprint size, at least in part, and then also simultaneously gain a different relationship to each other. So the 300-foot tower extends at the bottom facing onto a park, while the taller tower extends out at the top to kind of provide larger floor plates where you have the best views. And then each is shaped to create terraces and also kind of work efficiently as a kind of structural technique for extending out 48 feet in the case of the taller tower. And together, these simple moves create 2 towers that are almost like a single form that's been cut in 2, so that although they have their own independence, they're also kind of intimately linked. And we also, I have to say, like the idea that the cantilevering face of the taller tower is actually facing not the waterfront, not the skyline view, but actually the neighborhood itself. So the building, in a way, addresses the neighborhood as much as it does the river. As I mentioned, it cantilevers out 48 feet overall. There's 2 24-foot cantilevers, but at each of these kind of volumes, it steps out 24 feet and then 24 feet again, and then does it the same. So altogether, you end up with a 48-foot cantilever. And then on the water side of the smaller tower, there's a series of kind of terraces that mimic that echo the soffits of the cantilevers. Together, we hope that these kind of volumetric gymnastics also break the building down into a series of 7- and 8-story volumes that are more resonant with the scale of the neighborhood around it. And we wanted to accentuate that in the way that we treated the facade. Greenpoint's somewhat famous for having this kind of wood slats or wood shingle facades of various levels of quality. And we wanted to really take that and think about it in maybe a more abstract way in our facade and utilize it to help differentiate these different volumes. So essentially we developed kind of 5 different types of panels with either diagonal shingles or vertical shingles or horizontal shingles that could be deployed across the tower to accentuate that difference. And also to have the building be able to react dynamically throughout the day as shadows play across these different panels. Like so. Each of the windows is 8 feet by 8 feet, so you get a kind of maximum view of the skyline while having a robust building that, that feels solid and in keeping with the punch windows of the neighborhood. We started by building some in-house mock-ups out of plaster to try to understand better how the shape and the shadowing would work, and then ultimately built a kind of larger mock-up together with the precast company we're working with, BPDL, to really test this in place and see how it played out over the course of a day. Then, of course, we went on to the performance mock-up of the different conditions around the building and have been testing glass really even all throughout this, period as well. And now it's the facade is well under production and will start being assembled actually next week or lifted into place in site next week. We achieved the structural gymnastics of the 48-foot cantilever through a series of sloped columns that are tapered at an angle where they have less impact, as little impact as possible, you could say, on the interiors of the units. And then that's then support the cantilevers in conjunction with a series of post-tension hangers. One of the issues that we found as we started to get deeper into the structural design is that all of that force, at least on the south face of the building, is coming down directly onto the lobby, naturally, where we wanted to actually enter. And so we had to look at a strategy for trying to avoid having columns come down into the kind of main space that's welcoming you into the building. And so we looked at different strategies for splitting the columns or creating mega beams that could divert the load around it, or how much we could live with angled columns within the lobby itself. And in the end, we settled on splitting the mega column here into an A-frame that would be exposed within amenity spaces that are in a bridge structure above the lobby. So 2 kind of A-frames, one is embedded within a wall, but the other will be exposed within an amenity space that hovers over the main lobby. Here you see that kind of bridge and lobby space below it under construction just this week. And also the forms were just stripped off of these A-frames. And here you see a view. One of the impacts of COVID was that the taller tower, which is 100% market rate, had to stop for a number of months. But we have 30% affordable overall in a pure affordable building and also a mixed building, and both of them were able to proceed throughout the COVID. And then here, a bit of a time lapse of the building starting to come up. As I mentioned, it's really this podium building and then the shorter tower that we're able to proceed first, but the others coming up as well. So with that, I'll stop and thank you so much.
Great. How's it going, Jason?
Good, Ron. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you. Fantastic presentation. Clearly, I mean, the ambition and concept is being matched with the constructability and the technological ambition. So that's appreciated. I think that's some of the barriers we often confront. Also, the graphic clarity is something that is appreciated in a way of storytelling. And I know that as architects, you know, you tend to be a storyteller, but you're also, that's almost the diagnosis. And in a lot of ways, we become mechanics in resolving these sites, which was very clear in your Houston project. But can we all know if we've been to Dallas or not? You sound like you've spent time in Texas. Have you been to Dallas? Or
Oh yeah. I've been to Dallas.
okay.
I mean, since long before, but also as part of that Dallas Connected City. And I worked a little bit on the Wiley Theater when I was quite early on at the time, but worked a few weeks on
a lot of
the
nice transformation over that time. So another thing I liked was the idea of dichotomies. I think we struggle with that here all cities have their challenges, but in North Texas and Dallas in particular, it may seem that we have more disparity, that range, there's more of a void between these endpoints. And we seem to confront the notions of scarcity and abundance quite often. I mean, for example, I tend to like to tell people that we get as much annual rainfall as Seattle, Washington gets, and so we get that in 3 downfalls, and then we're flooded, and then you have drought conditions. There's a lot of socioeconomic issues that we confront as well. And so when I look at both Houston being on the bayou, and I think about your Faina Forum in Miami, and we know there's climate change, the sea is rising, and you're getting a lot of rainfall. Are there special considerations? Are you adapting to the site? Are you just are you rethinking these challenges completely, or how does that thought process go through?
Yeah, well, I think it's also something we faced in the Greenpoint project as well, because it's also, if it stayed at the level that it naturally would be at, it would be in the floodplain, and so everything is lifted up. I think 12 feet above the level of the actual waterfront, and luckily we're redoing the waterfront at the same time, so we can try to recalibrate things and still provide public access. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, just like at the Trinity, I mean, the topographic measures you need to take in order to provide resilience from flooding are often things that create barriers, and they're the kind of divisions that you have to think about very clearly without actually undermining them, because they're so important to be clear divisions between what will flood and what won't flood. And we're working on a similar thing actually in Hoboken here, where we're on a much smaller level, really the level of kind of civic infrastructure, helping the city design new flood barriers along the waterfront that can be more than flood barriers, can also be seating, or can be absorb different public programs. So that's something that could really separate the community out from the waterfront, which is such an asset, can instead be seen as a resource, at least.
So staying on Greenpoint, it seems as the building has gone up and you had the outdoor spaces, it sounds like there was a slowdown in construction due to the pandemic, but has there been any discussion about the outdoor space as being sort of an advantage or something of a premium at this point now that it's under construction?
Yeah, well, they're definitely happy that that there's outdoor space already planned for the building, for sure. It's of course a challenge. Indoor amenities became more or less inaccessible during this whole time, and given the trade-offs that happen in New York, everyone has, generally speaking, smaller apartments than they might have elsewhere, and you do that so that you can enjoy the city or enjoy common spaces, and once those become inaccessible, it's a challenge. And so it's great to have access to rooftop terraces and things, but also maybe more importantly, access to the waterfront itself as a public amenity, because that's been so critical. I mean, I think the image I showed of the circles on the lawn is from Domino Park, which is actually just close to where I'm sitting right now, and it's been so, in a way, more active than it was before, because people are really need that kind of space now.
Well, one question I also have is really about scale, and it's about maybe complexity. And I would say that your work seems to have almost an intentional complexity, and that's distinct from complicated. Mm-hmm. It's, again, this ambition. It seems each program element has a certain legibility, and you maintain the legibility as the components are brought together. So I'm still looking through the lens of the local opportunities here in Dallas, and how we deal with city and fabric and urbanism of sorts. Do you think, number one, is that really an intentional strategy of giving each part legibility and almost invigorating the building through program? For example, circulation becomes a main piece of the program. The question would be also is, do you deal with scale that way? Does it help break down the scale of large projects and maybe in some ways create the microcosm of a city? And does that then in fact help, almost like the systems within a city, help knit together your buildings into that fabric of its context? I'm just curious if that's in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I think so. I think, for example, one of the challenges in the Houston project was really how to just make sense of such a big undifferentiated space and how to begin to give it some coherence. And maybe it seems kind of obvious at this point, but just defining a series of clear themes to different segments of the building that could then be connected, almost like a kind of kebab, so that you have the chicken and you have the bell peppers and then you link them together. I think that kind of thinking is behind a lot of the things that we do, trying to kind of embrace a certain kind of clarity, but then weaving it together in a way that allows you to appreciate multiple things at the same time, multiple kinds of things to do, even in a simple way.
Yeah, it certainly seems that you take this sort of pragmatic approach to like sort of amplify it to a sort of radical pragmatism that lets turns it on its head, which is of course something that brings some level of invention. I think invention and creativity is what we're all looking for, that spark, instead of it being sort of ordinary. But again, that line of thinking about urbanism, in Dallas we have a lot of vacant sites. There's a lot of surface parking. There's a lot of gaps, and in some ways, cities need more porosity. You want there to be more access. Ours, a lot of them are still asphalt, but they're being converted into park space. I'm just curious, how do we infill? How do we glue spaces together? How do you, in your experience, do you see knitting together spaces that maybe aren't under your purview in a project? How do you link spaces?
Yeah, that's I think it's really a critical issue, and the interplay between the need for kind of at a kind of basic urban level, kind of continuous street edge, but then also some kind of relief, and also dealing in environments where that's simply not the model. How you engage with that. I think it's also an issue of how you create connections across those kinds of spaces, or underutilized spaces. In the Bridge Park project, one of the challenges I didn't talk about so much is that the community we're trying to serve, Anacostia, is actually somewhat separated from the waterfront already by infrastructure that's there, and you have to go under a highway underpass to get to the new park that we're making. And how do you bridge that kind of gap with art or with other ways that people can engage with things? And I think that you need creative strategies, because you don't always have the luxury of infilling things with actual building.
Right. You talked, or at least I talked in the introduction a little bit about AMO and your involvement with that group. And I'm curious, do they still find a place in your work, or how does that relationship between OMA and AMO work? Are they separate entities that get sort of contracted through separate individuals?
Well, it's a kind of both and. There's both work that AMO undertakes as kind of proper AMO work that may or may not bring in other specialists, sociologists, or graphic designers, or kind of as a way for us to also intermesh with other disciplines. But then there's also kind of the methodology, or the kind of centrality of research, and of starting from a position of admitting our own ignorance, which I think we try to do for every architectural project too. So
yeah, no, it's a fascinating group, and I think we all appreciate the research, both internally to maybe the work we all do, and to what, of course, you and OMA is doing relative to taking us somewhere different. I mean, providing a reason, adding value to the clients. And I know you've worked, again, Greenpoint is a developer-led project. So are there certain barriers you see with those types of clients? I mean, does the developer squeeze schedule? I mean, the speed to market is always an issue. The margins are narrow. Are there certain barriers that you've had to overcome, or does this line of thinking, this idea of research and giving them the logic that you presented to us, does that help overcome those issues?
Yeah, well, I think, there's always limitations, from budget. I mean, as everybody knows, I'm sure everybody on this call is constantly dealing with a budget crisis. And especially lately. And yeah, those definitely come into play. And I think for us, some of the clarity that we try to achieve with the basic thought behind the project, helps us often, because it means that the basic idea is you can identify, and everyone can agree to try to not give that up, be it the kind of materiality of the facade, or the basic shape of the building, or what we're all trying to achieve. So I think, in the case of Greenpoint, that was actually particularly clear, where the moves that were the most important to keep were clear to us and clear to the developer, Brookfield. And so we knew, as we had to inevitably, do value engineering and things as we moved through the project, what we wanted to keep, but also what even smaller moves of changing the color of a facade or the materiality of this or that, how it could potentially undermine what was important. So
It's a handsome skin on that one. The envelope is quite nice. All right. Hi, Nate.
Hey, you guys want to join the conversation, give our viewers a chance to give you a few questions. So first, Jason, thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate it. So a few questions, and if you have questions, go ahead and send them in on the Zoom Q&A function. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So one person says, Robert, talk more about your design process. We saw a lot of models of the Greenpoint project. Is it typically a collective effort?
Yes, it is typically a collective effort, I think. I mean, we try to, in a way, the emphasis on narrative that we sometimes talk about is partly about trying to convince the client or convince the public or convince whoever, but it's also about starting with the convincing ourselves, because we're, working together and meeting together to try to figure out where the pressure points are and what the best solutions are. So, we're often undertaking a kind of charrette where everyone tries to throw out ideas and models is often the best way to do that. I mean, we're really missing that now. We're back in the office, but in a way that maybe models are having to play a little less of a role in our process right now, but typically they're central to it. And I think in general, we try to run down every lead, so to speak, when we start to identify the issues. And so we try to figure out all the possible ways we could solve a problem, and then really take a hard look at what works.
Thanks. Another question, I'll paraphrase it, but basically, how does the studio take into account social inequality and economic disadvantage issues when you're kind of working with developers and developing a project?
Yeah. Well, I think, there's, I'm sure, countless ways we should be doing that, but one way we have been doing is trying to make sure that, for example, the affordable housing that we have within a larger residential project is has the same level of robustness in terms of design as all the other aspects. So, I mentioned there's a part of the Greenpoint project that's 100% affordable, but we made sure that the precast facade that we have and the scale of the windows also continues onto that part of the building. And I'm also working right now on a 100% affordable housing project in San Francisco, where, of course, we're bringing the same level of investment and energy to that we do to every other project. So.
Thanks. How do you manage your budget?
We try to establish with the client some parameters, clear parameters at the beginning, and really, I mentioned before, make it clear what's important so that we can also figure out what to cut when that time comes. But like everyone, we try to do costings early and have a good sense of what the market conditions are. Things can surprise you sometimes, but you try to then work with the client to deal with them. So
I was glad to see you made time to produce a $10 bill of the bridge.
Yeah. Sometimes we just print our own money. That's the other way.
It comes in handy sometimes. Another question, can you discuss more about professional liability insurance for architects, if not personal, about your experience?
I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I mean, we have professional liability insurance, but I don't know what more I can add to to that, but it's good to have it.
Is there a waterfall on the bridge project?
We're trying to still have some water feature. There's some challenges when it comes to trying to bring a water feature onto a piece of infrastructure, so we're trying to work through that. But that was one of the original ideas, was that this shape meant that you could kind of have water come down from either side, and we wanted to actually bring water up from the river onto the bridge to aerate it, but that was quickly deemed to be not possible. You have to use potable water and kind of accessible water features. So,
yeah.
But
question about the Houston project. It says, how does accessibility play a role in the design intent and the impression from the users? So it says the staircases are the center point, but it's also viewable. Is there any focus on how these features will be viewed by those with accessibility challenges?
Yeah, well, so I don't show them, but we also have actually a lot of design invested in the elevators that run throughout the building that take you up to the roof as well, and to the second level. So the whole project is completely accessible, and I think that yeah, that'll become clearer as the building is closer to completion.
Great. Couple more. What are some of your specific strategies to keep that deliberate complexity in the design process while ensuring clarity of concept?
I think that you know, for us, there's often you know, inevitably there are competing interests in any project. You know, and you know, between wanting to maximize the area in a project, but at the same time react in some way to a different scale around it, for example, or and I think we try to frame those challenges or those conflicts as clearly as we can, and then that friction, the kind of between them, really creates the sparks, you know. So, and I think that spark is really the complexity that we're trying to achieve. Not necessarily anything too forced, but something that comes from confronting a problem head on.
Great. A question on the Houston project. What material are the fabricated treads in the main stair of the Houston project? Awesome, by the way.
Thanks. Well, the one I showed the most is precast concrete, the treads. And then the second one is aluminum, and then the last one is steel, but clad in wood.
Great. And I think this will be our last question. So, recognizing the dichotomy elements you discussed earlier, what are your thoughts on architecture responding as a solution to the problems of the age, as opposed to being a symbol of a time, whether that symbol is positive or negative?
Yeah, I think that you know, the way that at least I'm trying to use the projects we're doing to confront the problems of our time. You know, of course, it's not that we're have a solution to the general zeitgeist, but you know, when it comes to issues of you know, economic disparity or you know, underserved communities, I think that, you know, working on projects that directly engage those issues and trying to do it in a way that has real efficacy is the way that we can really make an impact. You know, so, and that's, yeah, and what that means for the actual design that we produce is something, you know, it's always a matter of kind of feeling in the dark and kind of being surprised at the end of the day what it all adds up to.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think joining what Ron said, I think we appreciate the complexity as well as the clear, concise kind of direction that we see in so much work that you and the studio do. And thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. We wish you the best. And all of you joining us tonight, thank you so much. We wish you could be in person, but we're thankful you're here with us. Ron, any parting thoughts?
Only to say thanks again. I appreciate that, and insightful.
Yes.
Look forward to seeing this project in Houston.
Yeah, no, thank you all. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for taking the time to listen.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have you come in person sometime.
Yeah, would love to.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks again. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. Good night.